Today we're joined by Salim Mansur. He is a former PPC candidate. He ran for us in the 2019 election in the riding of London North Centre. He is a professor emeritus at the University of Western Ontario. He's also a columnist and an author. He's an expert on this topic, and he joins us this week to discuss the Ukraine war. Let's bring on Salim.
Hello, Salim. How are you?
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Daniel. It's so wonderful to be with you.
Yes, thank you very much for taking the time to be at our show. If I may start by, we are celebrating right now the 1-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine. For me, it's a very bad news. And as you know, all that started a year ago when Canada decided to be part of that. As you may know, the Parliament, the House of Commons and the Senate passed a resolution 1 year ago after the visit of the president of Ukraine, and they were supporting Ukraine in that motion. And they said also in that motion that it's important because Russia was doing a genocide in Ukraine. So can you give us your point of view about that?
Yes, Max, I'm familiar with the emotion that you are recalling from April of last year, 2022. The context of that motion was the video presentation or speech that Zelensky, President Zelensky of Ukraine, made to the Canadian Parliament in April. And of course, the entire parliament unanimously cheered Zelensky and his presentation. There was no questioning about the veracity or truth to the background of what Zelensky presented. And then this motion was passed, and the motion focuses on, it was unanimously voted by all the 338 members present, calling Russian attack in Ukraine a genocide. And so this is the mainstream media narrative in the West, that Russia invaded Ukraine, and as the Canadian motion, parliamentary motion was, it is a genocide. Nothing could be further from the truth if one goes into examining the detail, because there's no context provided. There's no discussion. There is no history. The situation did not begin a year ago tomorrow or day after tomorrow, February 24th, when the special military operation was launched. It has to be put in the context. And the context is that from 2014, the Maidan coup that overthrew an elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, and installed in his place Petro Poroshenko. From that coup till the special military operation that was launched on February the 24th by the Russian Federation, the genocide was taking place in eastern Ukraine, in the oblast of Luhansk and Donetsk. And these are all on official record. The observers of the OSCE, the Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe, people like Colonel Jacques Baud, who was reporting on what was happening in eastern Ukraine, reported that for 8 years, it was the Kiev regime, first of Poroshenko and then of Zelensky, was escalating the bombing of those two provinces. That was a genocide, because that was an attack by Ukrainian Nazi regime on the Russian-speaking Ukrainian citizens of Luhansk and Donetsk, with casualty figures in excess of 15,000. And our parliament got it backwards and have gone forward to embrace and support a reprehensible regime in Kiev. It is a Ukro-Nazi regime that is a tyrannical regime that has in fact created the war. And here we are in Canada, Maxime, a year later, we have become a co-belligerent in a war led by the United States, a proxy war against Russia that is escalating and could escalate to a nuclear level. And our parliament, the prime minister, and the opposition leaders have put Canada in a very dangerous position as a co-belligerent against Russia. And we, Canada, are in the middle of two nuclear powers, Russia and United States. And there is no discussion about this matter in the parliament or in the media.
You're absolutely right. They didn't have any debate at that time when they passed that motion. And we must say also that motion didn't have any legal, how do you say that? Legal
basis.
Impact. Yeah, legal impact. It's only a motion. But what I didn't like about that is you didn't have the debate. You didn't have another point of view, like you just said. And actually, we are the only national political party, as you know, Salim, that has another point of view on that. And we look at the history, and that's why we said it's not, our war, and we must not be part of that. And I believe that why Canada must not be part of that. If you can explain a little bit more the history of, the situation of our country, when a war happened in Iraq or in the Suez Canal or other in Afghanistan or other places like that. I believe that our goal is to promote peace and stability and diplomatic solution. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, Maxime. I mean, to begin with, this Prime Minister and this Parliament, the 44th Parliament of Canada, has abandoned and violated Canada's post-1945 tradition of peacekeeping and peacemaking. That's the number one point I would say. Our tradition has been peacekeeping and peacemaking and involvement on international issues of war and peace on the basis of UN authorization. There is no UN authorization for this war. There is no UN Security Council resolution on this matter. Neither is there a basis of this war of NATO, because Ukraine is not a member of NATO state. And so there cannot be an Article 5 of NATO position that Ukraine is a NATO member that has been aggressed upon by Russia, and therefore this is what is a NATO war. Canada has no position on this war, except we have gone along with the globalist agenda of the United States and the World Economic Forum and the European Union that is using NATO for their globalist agenda. Now, Canada, anyone who wants to look back at this history of Canada post-1945 can very quickly see that every engagement where we were involved physically in a war was one with a UN authorization. The Korean War was on the basis of uniting for peace. That was a UN operation that Canada participated in. Then, after the Korean War, all of our activity has been in peacekeeping and peacemaking role. We were not a participant, for instance, when Britain and France went to war on the Suez crisis in 1956. We opposed it. In fact, we opposed it, and that was the basis on which Foreign Minister Lester Pearson, backed by our Prime Minister Louis Saint Laurent, was given the Nobel Peace Prize. That's our tradition. We then participated in a war that was authorized by the UN Security Council resolution to take out Iraq from the occupation of Kuwait. An ultimatum was given to Baghdad to move out of Kuwait when Saddam Hussein occupied Kuwait. Saddam Hussein did not live up to the ultimatum. There was a UN Security Council resolution, Chapter 7, and we participated in that war. But we did not participate in the 2003 war because there was no UN Security Council authorization. Jean Chrétien refused to participate in that operation, in that war. We participated in Afghanistan, Operation Enduring Freedom, because that was again a UN authorization. And as a UN member state, we participated in it. In other words, there is no basis from the point of view of our history, our tradition, and the role that all our prime ministers have played from the time of Louis Saint Laurent to the time of Stephen Harper, that we have not gone into military engagement without the proper authorization in international law. This is the first prime minister and the parliament that has taken Canada into a war, has been spending money. We don't know whether Canadian soldiers are involved as mercenaries or in, a civilian uniform, but we have heard reports that Canadians have been taken prisoners of war after Mariupol fell. There is a report that a retired Canadian general, Trevor John Cadeau, is a prisoner of war. We don't know how many other Canadians are prisoner of war. We have been spending our money that is needed at home desperately, and we are sending that to a war that is got no authorization except for whatever is the politics of Mr. Justin Trudeau that he is engaged in pursuing at this time.
So Salim, what do you think has changed? Like, not only do we have our leadership doing something completely different than our kind of historical backing, but there's also no opposition in Ottawa. There's no voice speaking towards this kind of peacekeeping tradition that we hold so proudly in this country. What do you think has changed with contemporary politics?
Except us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you're talking about the parliament, the answer is at once very simple. We don't have Maxime in the parliament. And ask the question, the difficult question, the relevant question, the important question for the Canadian people to understand and to know about how we got into this, why we are into this, because nobody, neither the Prime Minister or the Cabinet, nor the leader of the opposition, Her Majesty's or His Majesty's opposition, have explained what is Canada's national interest in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's a question. Yes, Salim, about the Canada national interest or security interest. What we are doing right now in Ukraine, I think it's going against our security interests, making Russia an enemy of our country when Russia is our neighbor. I don't see any interest for us as an independent country to be part of that.
Exactly. And Maxime, in the larger picture, 1 year into this war, the larger picture can now be clearly visible. We have a situation where it is basically the collective West, the G7 countries, that is engaged in a war against Russia. And the entire global South is on the other side. There is no support for this war outside of the G7 countries. In fact, within the G7 countries, people are now beginning to question. In America, people are questioning. President Trump has made several statements that if he was the president, America would not be involved in this war at all. In fact, there would be no war. So our role should have been to mediate, to arbitrate, or to stand apart from getting into this crossfire, because we are really in the crossfire, as you say, Maxime. We are in the middle of United States and Russia. Russia is our neighbor just across the Arctic. So nobody has explained what is our national interest.
And also, like you said, I may add, 80% of the population on this globe is not against Russia. So we are a minority. But if you read the mainstream media here, it's like everybody on this planet is pro-Ukraine, and that's the opposite. That being said, I don't know if you had the time to look at the speech that President Putin gave a couple of days ago, and he was saying to Western countries like us they may attack Ukraine to regain Crimea and Donbass, and that will be soon. And he doesn't want also other countries like the US on us being part of that, participating in Ukraine. Can you explain a little bit more in details the speech that he delivered a couple of days ago?
Yeah, I mean, it was yesterday. It was an anniversary, and he spoke. That was the Russian version of the State of the Union address, and he took the time to basically lay out the ultimatum to all the countries of NATO who are directly and indirectly involved in the war. And he said that you have violated all the red lines that we put up, and you have ignored us. But now it is very clear, and you have said it openly. For instance, the German Foreign Minister Anna Berlock, she said only a couple of weeks ago that Europe is at war with Russia. So President Putin reminded them that you all have said that you're at war. If you and your forces enter Ukraine or are found to be participating with the Ukrainian forces, then you will be a target.
Yeah.
That is now very clear. The red line has been crossed, and any NATO country engaging on the side of the Ukrainian physically with the Russian forces will then be a target of Russian forces. So we don't know. Nobody has told us, Maxime. Are you aware of it? Are you aware of from in Ottawa, in any discussion, that what is Canadian Armed Forces people, if any, are doing in Europe?
Yeah, we don't know. They're not supposed to be there, but we never know. I don't trust, as you may know, the government. That being said, actually, it's a little bit dangerous because it's another step. We said that a couple of months ago that the fear is this conflict and the escalation of this conflict. And so that's happening. That's another step. But I believe also, and I may be wrong, that China said something about Western countries like the US giving ammunitions and equipments to Ukraine, that they may do the same thing to Russia. I am right?
Well, it was... my understanding is it was the Polish president who got engaged with the Chinese foreign minister and basically indicated to the Chinese foreign minister, Wang Yi, that he and the European members of NATO would be not looking favorably if China is supplying or equipping Russian forces with weapons and ammunition and so on. And Mr. Wang Yi replied, according to the press report, that China is not doing any such thing, but it is interesting that the Polish president is talking about China when it is the Poles and the Europeans who are supplying Ukraine with weapons and ammunition to make war with Russia. So he turned the question around. But you're right. In the larger picture, Maxime, and this is something that, again, the Canadian people are not being informed because the media has been bought over by Justin Trudeau, as you remember, before the 2019 election. So this media is no longer an independent media. It is a propaganda arm of the Liberal Party and of the globalists. And the Canadian people are not being informed of the reality that the world is now basically returning back to the period that was there before the unipolar world of America. That is, there is a multipolar world emerging. There is an oppositional force emerging to the World Economic Forum, and that is being led by Russia, China, India, South Africa, and other Middle Eastern countries that are joining. This is the new world that is emerging as a result of what has happened in Ukraine and the attack upon Russia by the G7 countries. And unfortunately, we Canadians are becoming isolated from the rest of the world.
Yes, you have a point there. And also, but you spoke about the media here in Canada. They have only one narrative, and you're right about that. But I look at a poll and a survey that Angus Reid did last Monday, February 20. And so I was surprised that 26% of, 23%. 23% of Canadians said that they're looking and they hope that they can have a peace discussion with Ukraine and Russia. So when you have almost a quarter of the population that is saying that, with all the narrative coming from the mainstream media that is the opposite of that, because Canadians we're not able to have the other point of view like tonight. And so at least we have 21% of the population who are saying, we must try to have a peace discussion. And that's encouraging. That's why I believe that, if this point of view is out there, we will be able to have the majority on our side. And that's the big challenge that we have, because yes, you're right. We are canceled and we cannot count on the opposition. Like Daniel said, there's no opposition in Ottawa. We are in Parliament, we are the only real opposition. And my goal is to be in that Parliament as soon as possible to have our point of view there. But that being said, it's a challenging time, and we can fear the impact of the conflict on our lives, maybe in the near future. We don't know what can happen, but all that must stop as soon as possible. And that's why you are asking for a ceasefire.
Well, we as Canadians should have been talking about and asking for a ceasefire so that we could bring the parties together. We now know, Maxime, for instance, that the special military operation that began a year ago, February 24th, within 2 weeks of the launch of the special military operation. By the way, the special military operation is equal to what we call in Canada R2P, responsibility to protect. And if you have the time, I don't know if you have the time, or if you can come back, we can talk about the historical context in which the special military operation was launched. But within 2 weeks, the Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, who has now come out and spoken about it, he was in Moscow and then he was in Kiev to try to open up the connection between Moscow and Kiev, to talk about ceasefire and then begin the negotiation of a settlement, But Naftali Bennett says that he was instructed by Washington not to proceed any further, that he was stopped. So now you can see that not only Naftali Bennett was stopped, there was a delegation going from Kiev and from Moscow to Istanbul on the invitation of the Turkish President Erdogan, and Turkey is a NATO member, to engage in a diplomatic discussion to find a way to end the war and open up a follow-up to maybe the Minsk agreement that had been violated by Kiev against the ethnic Russians, who then voted to become an independent republic. And that is what was the backstory of the special military operation. So when you put all of these facts together, and if the Canadian people understand what it is the military industrial complex of the United States, the deep state, the unipolar power, they have been pushing for this war based upon their own neocon agenda, backed up by the European power and the World Economic Forum. And here we are, Canadians, we are fully behind that. In other words, Canadian leaders in parliament, with the exception of you, Maxime, have turned out to be, instead of peacemakers and peacekeepers, they have become warmongers. When did this happen? How did this happen? I think this is the ground that we are standing upon, Maxime. You are my leader, and I'm a member of your party, and I have stood with you. Your leadership is so vital because right across Canada, from coast to coast to coast, it is only you, a former foreign minister, a former member of the parliament and Canadian federal cabinet, has stood up as the man talking about peace in the tradition of peacemaking and peacekeeping. That is our tradition that has been violated and abandoned by the warmongers. I mean, you have the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, saying, it's all on record, saying that Justin Trudeau, the prime minister, has not done enough for Ukraine, that if he was the prime minister, he would do more and more. More and more of what? What does he want to do?
Yeah, it's all about pandering and vote buying at this point. Now, Salim, we do have to wrap up this segment and move on to some other things. Do you have any final things to say to our viewers? I think you might have an upcoming event that our viewers might be interested in seeing.
Yeah, I mean, in less than 2 weeks, I am booked to go to Calgary, Daniel, Maxime. Maxime, you might know about it. I mean, this is the Arthur Pawlowski and his people of the Independence Party of Alberta. They are having a day-long session in Calgary, to which they have invited me. It is about globalism, World Economic Forum, and so on. And of course, the whole agenda, the issue about the fallout from the Emergencies Act, that's what I'm also engaged in and busy going around talking. Hopefully we can have a discussion on that sometime in the future.
Yeah.
And Salim, if our viewers want to follow you, where can they go on social media?
Well, every Friday evening, almost every Friday evening, I am on a Friday night chat with Mark Friesen on social media that is streamed live from 9 o'clock to 10:30, and they can tune in from Facebook or from StreamYard. And my podcast with Robert Vaughan, who with whom you have done a podcast. We regularly podcast, and all of those are available on Just Right Media that Robert uses, both on YouTube and on Rumble.
Excellent. So everyone interested, please go and follow Salim. And for those in Calgary, do watch out for events. I know that Salim's been promoting that event on his social medias as well. Please go check that out. Salim, thank you so much for joining us and informing our viewers of a different perspective on the Ukraine war. Is definitely illuminating, and we look forward to having you on again sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Salim, and we share our point of view. Thank you again, and I believe that the common sense about that war in Ukraine will prevail. I hope so, with people like you that are speaking and telling the other side of the story that Canadians must know. Thank you, Salim.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.